So I grew up in a arty family who didn't want me to do art. So it's always been around me, art, and it's kind of weird that as I get older, I see what a strange thing it is to do. Whereas from my background, it was always seen as something you got on with in everyday life. So it's obviously affected me in that way. But I just think there isn't specific things from my childhood that I'm consciously replaying, except all those things that people do about thinking back to when they were growing up and what was happening and stuff like that. So I think it probably plays out in some ways, if that makes sense. I think the background in art has always given me a kind of, and I can't tell how much of this is my nature and how much of this is kind of learned behaviour, but it's kind of always made the commercial side of art seem at odds with the creative side, if that makes sense. So it's always a tension between trying to make something that is popular or trying to make something that is true to yourself. And I think that's one of the things. But yeah, that idea of it being a craft, of the process, liberating ideas and things emerging from that is kind of what I think I got from my early life, and the need to make things that make things that kind of are true but not conscious. So there's no kind of propaganda in my art. I'm not trying to tell a story or push an idea, though things seep through, if that makes sense. I think it's hard to pin down biggest influences. They kind of change. They go everything from cave paintings, because of the work, through different periods of time, looking into illuminated manuscripts. Obviously, people like Cézanne, I would say, and I like Cézanne because he always looked like he struggled, and he did really bad paintings sometimes. So it wasn't like he was doing something very slick, but seeing the recent exhibition of his at the Tate, which I think was last year or year before, it was, they still look fresh to me. I also like painters such as Richard Diebenkorn, as so many. I mean, it's kind of, every time I go into the National Gallery or I go around and look at something, I go and pick up something new, whether it's a Velázquez or a Goya or a more contemporary painter. It's kind of like I'm stealing what Picasso said. I see what I can steal from them, what I like about them. I'm painting lots of stuff on I suppose the hook was the migrant crisis, but again, I'm looking back at things that I reading about and hanging it off Odysseus, the Greek myth about, and again, that's that idea about people travelling foot through because of war, and what that means, and the way that it's become the kind of zeitgeist of where we are now. These paintings are from when I was doing my degree, and I did my degree up in Liverpool in the late 80s, and it was a great place to be, but there was lots of, it was hard for lots of the people that lived there. There were lots of, struck me how many of the children were obviously struggling, so that was about that. This painting up here is about a friend of ours having a nervous breakdown, really. So they're all about things that touch me in my day-to-day life. They don't very often turn into campaigns or depictions or narratives. They're kind of leaping off points. Yeah. Okay, so I'm working on a series. I'm going to pull some stuff down out for you. So I'm working on a series about, as I said, about Odysseus and the modern interpretation of it. And I usually start off working in sketchbooks, and then sometimes do drawings, and part of that is really just because I don't have much time, I've got a family, and it's easier to sit down and draw for an hour or two rather than pull out my oil paints, which is frustrating in some ways. So I don't work in a very, I can say it is systematic, but it's not in a very linear sort of way. So I'll do drawings and I'll paint these things, and I usually work on 2 or 3 themes at once. And you can see these are kind of some of the drawings that I'm thinking about turning into paintings. I think that what's the hardest thing about being an artist? I think it's about not trying to measure yourself it's a hard thing. I feel compelled to paint, and I've always done it, and I have no problem coming up with ideas and painting. I find it quite difficult to actually fit in and think and change what I'm doing in a way that I think could be popular or commercially more viable. And I'm always amazed about kind of what's popping out with the drawings and the paintings, because I'm not sitting there kind of repeating something. So I think the hardest bit is just trying to make sense of it, really, as an activity in the world, if that makes sense. I kind of compelled to do it, and I do it, and I've always done it in spite of everything, and I can't really tell you why. And I get on with it, and I think now and again I get slightly anxious that is what I'm doing worthwhile? Is it good? And in a way, you can never tell. I have quite a Zen view about art, and it's about the way that things emerge through the process, rather than imposing or thinking about it in a rational way. So I think the hardest thing is letting go of the kind of material world and worrying about what other people are doing. I suppose the other hard thing about it is it's quite a lonely thing to do. You kind of stand I stay in my studio, and I'm lucky to have a nice space now, and I paint, and then people can't really join in the process. My children come and try and join in every now and again, but it's not a team sport really. So I just get on with it. So I think the hardest thing is really just trying to let go of those kind of material concerns and material expectations about what you're trying to achieve and why it's important. But the only real advice I give myself is not to worry about it and be anxious about it in terms of the art, and probably not to see it, not to try and fit in socially with what's going on in the art world, or worry about it. I don't think I ever did really. I think you do art in spite of things than because of things, from my point of view. So I think that's the key thing. I suppose I look at techniques to see what they give and what they can express. So I paint in watercolours when I'm outside, mainly because it's just an easy medium to take outside. I've tried things like Japanese woodblock printing, which is interesting. So I suppose each new technique is, as you get to learn it, is novel, whether it was invented thousands of years ago or whether it's digital. I like things that are immediate, like you can feel you're making marks and you're putting things on paper or canvas, and you can feel the resistance. As soon as there becomes more process involved, I've done quite a lot of intaglio printmaking in the past and stuff. I don't get so enamoured by learning a process or a craft. I like the immediacy and the plasticity of painting, and being able to just move things around and make marks, and it's just easy. I work on paper and canvas. I work on paper because it feels less precious and you can store it easily. So I have a plan chest full of works on paper. And again, it's in that spirit of trying not to be too precious about it when I'm doing it and see what's going to pop out. But yeah, I've kind of looked at things like digital art and taking photographs, and all that has become a lot easier now. But I'm just not very curious about learning how the software works more than being against it, if that makes sense.
Cool.
So when I'm working, I find if I do other types of work where I'm having to write things, or I can listen to music as long as there's no words. But when I'm painting, I can listen to words, which is really nice because I can listen to talking books, and I feel like I'm using both sides of my brain at once and using the time really in a valuable way. And those things seep into my painting. So I was recently listening to a really good book about Chinese history through its watercourses and how Taoist philosophy plays along with water. And lots of those things kind of resonated when I was painting, and I'm sure they kind of shape some of the things I'm thinking about as I'm painting. I do listen to music as well, mostly classical music in my old age. Really quite like minimalist stuff and things like that. It all kind of plays through. I feel like I'm quite lucky. I can almost carry out a conversation when I'm painting. I don't need to be there in silence. In terms of the best reaction, I had a show this last November just at the Oxo Towers, and the thing that really touched me was strangers coming in, and particularly people who said they were artists and saying the paintings affected them and how the colours were kind of amazing, and it just gave me some confidence that I'm not fooling myself and I'm able to carry on doing it. So it's kind of just people coming in and saying they're really great and they really like them, and it was particularly people off the street who didn't know me. So it wasn't kind of at the opening. They just came in. Sometimes they didn't know I was the artist, but they'd sit there and go, you know, that's what they want. And I suppose that's what I want for people to take away from it. I want them to have some gravitas. I want it to, if you stumbled across the work and it was out of context, not in a big white gallery trying to be pretentious and important, that people would sit there and go, it's really nice. And one of the strange things is I've had paintings stolen quite a lot, not quite a lot, but several times, and I take that as a great compliment that someone, you know, because it's not like I'm famous, so someone living in shared houses and things, when they moved out, they would happily go and take some of the paintings off the wall with them. And I always kind of thought that was a kind of backhanded compliment in a way, that it wasn't about anything except the art itself. And I suppose that's what I want people to take away, ideally from the paintings.